introduce myself first?
Yes.
Okay.
Good idea.
Then I'll put
That's why
him
you're
down.
here.
Hi, I am Noelle Harden, and we are at my home in Moorhead, which is also White Rabbit Urban Farm. This is Mustache, one of my Angora rabbits that I own. I'm just going to let him frolic while we're talking. Yes, so the Cascade Food Partners is a local network that serves both sides of our river, Cass County, North Dakota, Clay County, Minnesota, which includes Fargo, Moorhead, West Fargo, and a couple other communities. We were formed about 11 years ago and have worked locally on systems change related to helping people access food and helping people being able to have urban farms, community gardens, etc. About 5 years ago, we formed the Cascade Food Commission, which has worked a lot on local policy issues around the food system. Sure. So one interesting dynamic that we have, of course, is the state border, which is formed by the Red River, which goes right between Fargo, North Dakota, and Moorhead, Minnesota. So even though we are in two different states, the Fargo Moorhead area is really, we really act like one community here. So something that we have set out to do with the Cascade Food Partners is to look at food policy issues like whether or not residents can have chickens in their backyard or beehives in their backyard, and to try and help our 2 counties and 5 municipal jurisdictions think about having consistent policies across the different borders, even the state border, so that we can continue to feel like one community. It's interesting, right? Because we are the biggest metropolitan area in the state of North Dakota and in our region. And at the same time, we are kind of surrounded by a sea of some of the best farmland in the world here in the Red River Valley. So we've really tried to strike that balance in how we've looked at policy issues. For example, backyard chickens, which we helped Fargo write a backyard chicken policy about 3 or 4 years ago. They legalized chickens in Fargo, which was a big win for our network. But a couple of the rules in Fargo, you can only have hens, no roosters. So that is intentional to avoid conflict with neighbors. So a lot of it's kind of common sense policies, limiting the number of chickens that people can have. And also having some requirements around what kind of coop you need to have, and just in general encouraging people to be respectful of their neighbors whenever they are doing something different, like a boulevard garden, which I have, or getting a flock of egg layers. We have the overall network is led by a steering committee, and that includes public health on both sides of the river, so Fargo Cass Public Health and Clay County Public Health. And then also extension on both sides of the river as well. So I also work for the University of Minnesota Extension, and I co-chair the steering committee with a colleague from across the river. And then North Dakota State University Extension as well. And then we have a few other members on our steering committee. The Metropolitan Council of Governments is kind of a regional planning entity. We have representation from them, some other kind of at-large food system experts.
So what kinds of things did the Cascade Food Partners see happening during the pandemic? How did the pandemic challenge?
Yeah, so I think the overall thing is that people became so much more aware of the food system and how kind of fragile it can be. People became aware of supply chain issues and really having a deeper understanding of where our food comes from, and all the different connected systems that are at play. Transportation, for example, or different labor issues around meat processing was kind of a big area where people just became aware that it's a more complex process of how our food gets from a farm, often a farm in another country, to our dinner plates. So that increased awareness brought on people who were a lot more interested in growing their own food or being assured that there was, local farms who are supported in the community and systems in place that can support them. Seeing things like meat shortages at the grocery store, both created, some panic, as we all saw and experienced, but also just a greater interest in knowing how can we all have a role in living and creating a more resilient food system.
Partners do to respond then during the pandemic?
Yeah, so our first step was really ramping up the kind of communication that we did as a network. Our food commission went from meeting every other month to every week virtually, and trying to really keep our fingers on the pulse of what the community needed. About the first week or so after the WHO declared COVID a pandemic, we created a community food resource list, which was shared in the local newspaper and by a lot of other networks. It was crowdsourced information that we were constantly updating, and anybody could add to it, and we could verify that pretty quickly. We pretty quickly realized that that wasn't an ongoing need that we needed to fill because of all these other organizations that do that really well. But we could help kind of connect some of the dots and leverage our multiple connected networks, which is kind of how we see the Cascade Food Partners. It's not just one network, but it's all these networks that are really well connected. So then we were able to kind of pivot back to what we were really good at, which is policy change. And then we also heard from a lot of residents interested in expanding urban agriculture, including a new Boulevard Garden program in Fargo, which we helped residents advocate for. We helped the city of Fargo write a policy which was modeled after what was in place here in Moorhead. And then we were able to work throughout the summer to document how the temporary policy went. And then in December 2020, the Fargo City Commission voted unanimously to make it a permanent policy. Well, one thing that was really exciting is that we were able to have more of our network members more deeply involved in some of the work that was happening during the pandemic. We were able to cultivate more champions within the city commissions and city councils. There was just a lot more interest from elected officials in seeing changes in our local food system, and I think a greater willingness to kind of listen to residents and try some different things.
Like the pandemic?
Yeah, I think the core of it is really relationships and starting to get to know, who are some of those key players in the local food system. What obstacles are they facing in maybe expanding their food retail business? Things like, do they have access to commercial kitchens if they want to be able to sell more products? Do local farmers in the community, maybe avid community gardeners who are ready to become beginning farmers, are they able to access land in the community? That's really a big opportunity for local government and planners and people who are working on the community development side of things. You don't have to have a formal food policy council to be able to start building relationships and getting to know what some of the opportunities and the challenges are. So I think we've been able to really effectively kind of bridge different perspectives and look at urban agriculture and food entrepreneurship as kind of a sweet spot for a lot of potential win-wins within our community. All right, can you tell me about the Cascade Food Partners and the role that you've played?
Okay. The Cascade Food Partners is a network of partners that has a mission to assure that residents of Cass County, North Dakota and Clay County, Minnesota have access to safe, nutritious, affordable, and culturally based food. I am a member of the steering committee, and I'm also one of the co-chairs of the steering committee. The group started in 2010 in response to the good food movement that was going on across the nation, and we thought, what can we do locally to kind of address that? And the idea behind that movement was to increase access to healthy food as well as increase the production and consumption of locally grown food.
What did the Cascade Food Partners see happening during the pandemic, and how did you respond?
Okay. One of the things we saw was a increased need for emergency food as people lost their jobs and businesses were closing. We saw that need for money to purchase food and other supplies. So one of the things was that increased need for emergency food. Another thing we really noticed was the gaps in the food supply chain, globally, nationally, locally. Some of the big suppliers closed down due to the pandemic, so that caused some major gaps in our supply chain. And we also noticed that the vulnerable populations were most heavily hit with some of these issues. So our network responded in a number of different ways. I think the fact that we were an established network already was key. We were able to pull together very quickly and respond probably quicker than if we had no network at all. We had a history of working with a lot of these partners in the community, and so that helped us communicate and take a look at where the needs are and then respond to those needs pretty much right away. I would say have networks together, know your local networks too, because in all of this as well, we have our food partner network, which has a lot of organizations in it, but we also worked with other networks that were in the community to try to work on these things together. So things like the Moorhead Resiliency Task Force and the Growing Together Community Gardens Network, the Great Plains Food Bank Emergency Feeding Network, the Cascade Hunger Coalition, some of those partners we worked closer with during this pandemic to help solve some of these issues and problems. I think one of the things that we will be working on in the future is to have more of a laid out plan on what to do the next time this happens. Our group is in the process of redoing our Metropolitan Food Plan, and in that update we would like to include a section that involves emergency planning for some of these issues that can come about. Another thing that we saw was the whole, the vulnerable populations I had mentioned before, and some of the racism that is built into food systems, and we'd like to work a little bit more and enhance our work in the area of food justice and equity, and really targeting the populations who could really use our help. So.
Like to share.
One thing that we had done pre-COVID was the social network analysis, and I think that was useful in kind of helping us take a look at how connected we were to especially certain city governments, and that kind of helped to guide some of our work during the pandemic, where we might need to do a little more networking and outreach in some areas where some city governments we were better connected to than others. So having some of that research and knowing where our strengths and weaknesses are and our gaps are in our network was helpful too as we worked through some of these emergency situations.
So I am Megan Meerdahl. I am a registered dietitian by trade. I grew up in northeast North Dakota on a family farm. And about 6 years ago, I helped to start an organization called Food of the North. And we are a local Fargo Moorhead nonprofit. Originally, our name was Ugly Food of the North. And our mission was really to educate individuals about the food waste issue with a specific focus on the ugly, cosmetically imperfect produce. But over time, our organization evolved. We added some different activities, including a project called Little Free Gardens, where we encourage people to raise small gardens in publicly accessible places. We do a monthly event called First Fridays, and we educate people about food waste. So as we evolved and matured as an organization, we decided to rebrand ourselves, and we're called Food of the North. We're a really kind of grassroots organization. We're not doing events at city halls or in government buildings. We partner with a local theater company or local restaurants or local breweries. I guess you might say that our group and our community is a little bit more light and fun and very accessible to people. The content and the way the program is presented, it doesn't feel like it's an agenda where you're going to come in and doing that type of thing. And not that there's anything wrong with that. That's important and that work needs to be done. But how do we have opportunities for people to get engaged and learn about the food policy space and food system space where you can know nothing and you feel like you can come in and learn something? And so the Action Network is our monthly First Fridays event that we put on. So we pick a different topic each month in our local food community, and we ask people to speak to that topic. And every month we have someone from the Cascade Food Commission come and talk about what they're working on from the policy perspective. So it's an opportunity to kind of integrate that in a way that's light, and it's not heavy policy focused, but it's just exposing more people in our community to things that we can do to make our food system healthier, more sustainable, more culturally appropriate foods, while doing so in a way that's, like I said, just kind of fun and light. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of crazy to think back now on March 2020 when this all hit, and how we thought it was just going to be a couple weeks or maybe a month, and then it just kept going and going. So we are, our mission at Food of the North is to celebrate, connect, and empower our local food community and beyond. That is what we have chartered ourselves to do. And so we really saw our organization as being a group that brought people together, right? Like, we really wanted to build connections, we wanted to build relationships, we wanted people to see what so-and-so was doing and think of how we can connect them together. And that was really what our Action Network or First Fridays was all about. So then when that all goes away and you can't be in the same physical space, of course, like everybody else, we shifted to that virtual environment. We really tried to create an engaging virtual experience as much as we could. And over the last year and a half that we've been doing these virtual events, I think it's gotten better and better. So I think that every group that puts on events now has realized that there is an expectation now to have that virtual option, and a high quality virtual option. So when we used to do these First Friday events, I would say 90% of our focus was on the in-person experience and 10% was that recorded virtual option. And now we have groups of people from across the country and across our state who are tuning into First Fridays, and they're like, we love that we get to be a part of this more now, and that we're able to feel like we're a part of the experience in a more real way. And so as we're moving forward, we're really thinking about how do we still love that in-person experience, we see huge value, but we really need to make that virtual experience really engaging and really quality. Yeah, it's so interesting in terms of, you know, some of the things that the pandemic changed with regards to how we think about food, how we use food, how we are consuming and purchasing food. And from a lot of things that I've read, it was a lot of trends that we were on that are just accelerated now by COVID. So people shopping online for groceries and taking advantage of those curbside pickups or having things delivered to their doors, that's one whole space, right, that has just grown exponentially. But then on the other side, it's this like heavy interest in local and personal food resilience, right? People doing their own gardening, their own canning, really wanting to know who their farmers are and getting that local product. Because when we saw those disruptions in the food system, people were kind of freaked out by that, right? Like, I can't get meat or I can't get flour. I need to find my own source of that. And right now, from what I am seeing and reading, a lot of that is staying right now, especially with certain groups that were already in tune with food systems and local food issues, and it just kind of heightened their interest. I think it brought some new people into the conversation that weren't a part of it before, but we knew that the local food trend was already growing, and I think that this just kind of exposed some of the frailties of our food system and made even more individuals want to be more reconnected with food. I mean, just over the last 6 years, we've seen ups and downs, right? I mean, we have community gardens busting at the seams in this community. You go around and you look at churches, almost every church has a community garden, to credit to Jack Wood, one of our amazing community gardeners who has really built that community. We had a food co-op that unfortunately didn't make it. The farmers market is thriving. So it's like certain areas are doing really well, certain areas are struggling. We've got a really active hunger coalition that started a number of years ago that is really doing a lot of amazing work to bring together all the hunger relief organizations and create some shared goals and shared things that we can do with a focus on healthy local foods in there as well. So I think that we've seen a lot of positive activity and a lot of good momentum in the last years. And I would say that it just feels like it only keeps growing in terms of people who want to get involved, people who care about this, and moving that in a good direction.
In Fargo Moorhead.
Yes, my name is Jenny Mojo. I'm a Clay County Commissioner for District 3, the southern part of Clay County, Minnesota. As part of my committee portfolio, I've been assigned to be part of the Cascade Food Partners Network, and had the opportunity to serve as chair of that board for 1.5 years. That board looks collectively, holistically at different food issues within the Fargo and Moorhead region, as well as Cass and Clay counties, making sure that we're hearing from the community about items that are important to them, and then addressing that in terms of forming of ordinances and regulations going forward. So the pandemic really caused all of us to just take a collective huge breath of panic, of relax. I don't know what that was, but I think it was collective. In terms of pandemic response, everything changed so quickly, and even information that we'd been in a meeting in one day, by the time the afternoon came around, it seemed to be old news. And so having all of the entities at the table to be able to hear what they were hearing, and then we were able to share it forward, was vital. Add a whole nother step into that and see that we're dealing with 2 different states who had vastly different response to the pandemic as well. Making sure that we were aware of what was happening on the North Dakota side as well as the Minnesota side in terms of all of it was just imperative that we get the information out as soon as possible. One thing that the food partners did right away was made sure that we, instead of having every other month meetings to discuss these issues, wanted to make sure that we had the information and got it to the people. So we were quick to do Facebook updates twice a week to make sure that people knew where you could access grocery stores at limited hours, or if they had special hours of availability, making sure to share where rides were available. We do have some pockets of Clay County that are really isolated, and the change in hours really seemed to affect them. So we wanted to make sure that we had a place where people could go to address how to get, is there a senior ride share, things like that. So that's one thing that we really did notice, especially with the schools. So the schools had different delivery routes for food availability for kids and for families, and we worked with those entities to make sure and share that information as well. We all saw how important getting our goods and services are, the chain of events. And so when there's a hiccup in the road, how that can delay what is stocked on the shelves, how that delays how our food gets to us. I know there was a milk shortage and toilet paper shortage, and now switching to the ag piece, I know there was different growers in Clay County that we dealt with that had a hard time getting their market-ready hogs to a plant to be processed. And so it really did cause people to look at where their food comes from and maybe take a decision to say, okay, maybe we want to invest in having a certain portion of our food come from a local local venue. And so then on a broader scheme, as for the government, we've really seen how can we make sure that in a time like this, there's ways to avoid these shortages. Is it a transportation piece? Do we have a gap in transportation needs? Is there something there that we could help to facilitate getting it faster? Those are huge problems that take a lot of conversation and looking at, so that's something that we're moving forward with that. But also with how the government, Clay County specifically, provides services to our citizens. We were able to streamline a lot of our processes and departments to make sure that people had the availability to access information online. And not everyone can get to the courthouse from 9 to 4:30 to access documents. And so making sure that we had things online that were available for folks to print off, scan and send in, trying to meet people on a more flexible position. And I think coming out of COVID, that will be one of the better things I think that we've been able to do, is adjust how we deliver goods to the citizens as well.
So
I constantly think about it and just think, okay, what did we miss, right? So as a government, what did we miss? Or, you know, how are we so vulnerable to such a huge, you know? And I don't know what the answer is to that, I guess. But.
you see on that for social support and
Yep.
resilience.
So, and then, you know, I have 4 children. I have a freshman, and I, because of this work, have a lot more flexibility than my husband that works in an aggregate pit, right? So I was with our 15-year-old most of the time, and Moorhead High, their senior or freshmen were basically online from September until March. And so I would go down in his room, and he was, I mean, it was very clear he was withdrawing from us and just, you know, really, really struggling. And so what I said to my husband, the aggravating thing is I was watching him, you know, really fall into this despair because he was trying to do algebra as a freshman in a basement, you know, and it just did not fit his needs. And so as a person who had the availability to be there and help him every single day, and I couldn't, it just got worse and worse. I know, because of my work at the county, there are so many kids that don't have that. So if you have a kid that literally has constant supervision that's falling through the crack in despair, that's only going to be expanded on throughout the county. And so we'll see the residual effects of what COVID has done, the stresses on families. So making sure that we continue to invest in what those programs are to support healthy families, but also support the food network piece, and making sure that if a family does need an extra box of food, they know where to get it, and there's not a stigma around it. And that's the great thing about Fargo Moorhead. The river is just this beautiful river that does really separate policy-wise, but when you come down to it, we really have this working relationship that I don't think exists really anywhere else in the country. I mean, we work really well together.
Yeah, I think that's